Sarah Martinez had always been different, though no one at Lincoln Elementary School knew just how different. To her colleagues and the parents of her third-grade students, she was simply Miss Martinez, a dedicated teacher with an unusually calm demeanor and an impressive ability to handle even the most challenging children. What they didn't know was that before she ever set foot in a classroom, Sarah had spent 6 years as a Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete the grueling training program. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Sarah arrived at school 30 minutes before the first bell, her military precision still evident in everything she did. She unlocked her classroom door, flipped on the lights, and began her daily routine of preparing lessons and reviewing her students' progress. The walls of her classroom were decorated with colorful posters about reading and math, but hidden beneath her desk was a small locked drawer that contained reminders of her previous life, a challenge coin from her SEAL team, and a photo of her unit in Afghanistan. As students began filtering into the building, Sarah could hear the familiar sounds of morning chaos in the hallways. Locker doors slamming, children's voices echoing off the walls, and the steady footsteps of teachers hurrying to make last-minute preparations. She had grown to love these sounds over the past 3 years of teaching. They represented something she had never experienced during her military service: normalcy, safety, and the promise of shaping young minds. Her students began arriving at 7:45, each one greeting her with varying levels of enthusiasm. There was Marcus, who always bounced through the door with endless energy, and quiet Emma, who preferred to slip in unnoticed and immediately bury herself in a book. Sarah made it a point to acknowledge each child personally, remembering details about their lives and interests that helped them feel valued and seen. "Good morning, Aiden," she said as a freckled boy with messy brown hair shuffled through the door. "How did your soccer game go yesterday?" Aiden's face lit up. "We won 3-2. I scored the winning goal in the last 5 minutes." "That's fantastic. I'm proud of you for not giving up, even when the game was tied." These small interactions were what Sarah cherished most about teaching. In the military, success was often measured in missions completed and threats neutralized. Here, success looked like a shy child finding their voice, a struggling reader finally grasping a difficult concept, or simply helping a group of 8-year-olds feel safe and supported while they learned about the world. The morning lessons proceeded smoothly. Sarah guided her students through their reading comprehension exercises, helping them work through a story about friendship and problem solving. She moved around the classroom with quiet confidence, offering encouragement here and gentle correction there. Her military training had taught her to be constantly aware of her surroundings, and even in this peaceful environment, she automatically noted exits, potential hazards, and the mood and behavior of everyone in the room. During math time, she noticed that Tyler, one of her more challenging students, seemed unusually agitated. Tyler had a difficult home situation. His parents were going through a messy divorce, and he often acted out his frustrations at school. Today, he was tapping his pencil aggressively against his desk and shooting angry glances at his classmates. Sarah made a mental note to check in with him later. "Tyler," she said softly, approaching his desk, "would you like to help me hand out the worksheet packets? I could use an assistant." The simple responsibility seemed to calm him slightly, and he nodded, setting down his pencil and standing up to help. Sarah had learned that sometimes children who were struggling emotionally just needed to feel useful and important. It was a technique she had developed through a combination of her teaching training and her military understanding of how people responded under stress. Lunchtime brought a brief respite. Sarah ate her sandwich in the faculty lounge while grading papers and chatting with her colleagues. Mrs. Peterson, the kindergarten teacher, was discussing her plans for the upcoming Halloween party, while Mr. Rodriguez, who taught 5th grade, was expressing his frustration with the new district mandates about standardized testing. "I don't understand why they think 8-year-olds need to spend 3 hours taking a computer test," he complained. "These kids barely have the attention span for a 30-minute lesson." Sarah listened to the conversation while continuing to review her students' math work. She had learned to compartmentalize her thoughts and feelings, a skill that served her well both in combat situations and in the controlled chaos of elementary education. While her colleagues debated educational policy, part of her mind was automatically processing the sounds from the hallway: footsteps, voices, the occasional slam of a locker door. After lunch, the students returned to class more energetic but less focused. This was always the most challenging part of the day, and Sarah had developed strategies to help them settle back into learning mode. She dimmed the lights slightly and had them do a brief mindfulness exercise, asking them to close their eyes and take 3 deep breaths while imagining their favorite peaceful place. Now, slowly open your eyes and sit up tall like a mountain, she instructed. Mountains are strong and steady, just like you. The exercise worked its magic, and the students transitioned smoothly into their science lesson about the water cycle. Sarah used interactive demonstrations and encouraged questions, watching as their natural curiosity took over and their earlier restlessness faded away. It was during the afternoon reading block that everything changed. Sarah was working with a small group of students who needed extra help with their phonics skills when she heard commotion in the hallway. At first, it sounded like the usual noise, children moving between classes, perhaps a maintenance worker wheeling a cart past the door. But something about the voices made her pause and listen more carefully. Her military training had heightened her ability to distinguish between normal sounds and potential threats. What she was hearing now fell into the latter category. There were raised voices, rapid footsteps, and an undertone of panic that immediately put her on high alert. "Keep reading together quietly," she told her small group. "I'll be right back." Sarah moved toward the door, her body automatically shifting into a more alert posture. Through the small window in her classroom door, she could see people moving quickly in the hallway. Mrs. Chen from the office was speaking urgently into her radio, and Mr. Rodriguez was ushering students into his classroom with unusual haste. Before Sarah could open her door to investigate, she heard Mrs. Chen's voice come over the intercom system. "Attention all staff and students. We are implementing a lockdown procedure immediately. Please secure your classrooms and remain calm." The announcement sent a chill through Sarah's body, but not because of fear. Instead, it triggered the same focused alertness that had kept her alive during dangerous missions overseas. Her mind immediately shifted into tactical mode, assessing threats and planning responses. "Class," she said, turning back to her students with deliberate calmness, "we're going to play a special quiet game now. I need everyone to move away from the windows and sit against the back wall, just like we practiced during our safety drills." Her students, sensing the change in her tone but not understanding the danger, followed her instructions without question. Sarah quickly moved to lock her classroom door and turn off the lights, then guided the children to their designated safe area. Years of drill practice had prepared them for this moment, though none of them truly understood what was happening. "Remember, this is our quiet game," Sarah whispered as she knelt down among her students. "We need to be as silent as mice until I tell you the game is over." Inside, her mind was racing through protocols and possibilities. A lockdown could mean anything from a dangerous individual on campus to a nearby threat that might affect the school. Without more information, she had to assume the worst and prepare accordingly. As minutes ticked by in tense silence, Sarah positioned herself between her students and the door. If anyone tried to enter her classroom with harmful intentions, they would have to go through her first. Her colleagues saw her as a gentle elementary school teacher, but Sarah knew that if necessary, she could protect these children with skills that most people couldn't imagine. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of sirens in the distance and occasional radio chatter from the hallway. Sarah's students huddled against the wall, some looking scared, others treating it like an exciting adventure. She moved among them quietly, offering reassuring touches and whispered words of comfort. "Miss Martinez," whispered Emma, the quiet girl who loved books, "are we safe?" Sarah met her eyes with steady confidence. "Yes, sweetheart. You're safe. I promise." It was a promise she intended to keep, no matter what it might cost her. As she continued to monitor the situation, Sarah's mind cycled through various scenarios and response plans. Her military training had taught her to hope for the best while preparing for the worst, and, right now, that training was more relevant than it had been since she left the Navy. The lockdown continued, and Sarah remained vigilant, ready to transform from a caring teacher into something much more dangerous if her students' safety required it. Little did she know that her past and present were about to collide in a way she never could have anticipated. 20 minutes into the lockdown, Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps in the hallway were moving with purpose, but they weren't the measured steps of law enforcement officers or the hurried pace of school administrators. These footsteps belonged to someone who was trying to be quiet but failing, someone who didn't belong in this building during a crisis. Sarah pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear more. Her students remained silent behind her, their earlier chatter completely forgotten as the weight of the situation began to settle over them. Through the thin door, she could make out the sound of someone testing classroom door handles, moving systematically from room to room. Her heart rate increased, but not from panic. Instead, it was the controlled elevation that came with preparation for action. Sarah's mind automatically began cataloging the resources available to her. Her classroom had no internal phone, but her cell phone was in her desk drawer. The windows were too high for the children to escape through safely, and there was only one exit from the room. If someone with harmful intentions made it through her door, there would be nowhere for her students to run. The footsteps stopped outside her classroom. Sarah watched as the door handle turned slowly. When it didn't open due to the lock, the testing became more aggressive. Someone was definitely trying to get into her room, and it wasn't school security coming to check on them. Security would have announced themselves and used a master key. Moving with the silent precision that had been drilled into her during SEAL training, Sarah positioned herself directly behind the door. If someone forced their way in, she would be in the perfect position to neutralize the threat before they could even see her students. "Stay exactly where you are," she whispered to her class, her voice carrying an authority they had never heard from her before. "Do not move or make any sound until I tell you it's safe." The children nodded, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Emma clutched her book tightly against her chest, while Marcus, usually so full of energy, sat perfectly still. Tyler, the boy who had been agitated earlier, looked ready to spring into action, but Sarah caught his eye and shook her head almost imperceptibly. The door handle rattled more violently now, and Sarah heard someone muttering angrily on the other side. Then came the sound she had been dreading, someone slamming their shoulder against the door, trying to break it down. The first impact was hard enough to make the door frame shudder, but the lock held. Sarah knew it wouldn't hold for long. School doors weren't designed to withstand a determined assault, and whoever was outside clearly wasn't giving up. In the brief silence between attempts, Sarah could hear other sounds that painted a clearer picture of what was happening. There were shouts from different parts of the building, some angry and some fearful. The wail of sirens was getting closer, but not close enough. Whatever was happening, the police were still minutes away, and minutes could feel like hours when children's lives were at stake. The second impact against the door was harder than the first, and Sarah saw the frame begin to splinter. She made a quick decision that would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew her only as a gentle elementary school teacher. "Class," she said softly but firmly, "I need you to crawl under my desk and hide behind the filing cabinet. Stay together and stay quiet no matter what happens. Do not come out until a police officer or Mrs. Chen comes to get you. Do you understand?" Her students nodded and began moving quietly toward the hiding spot she had indicated. Years of practicing emergency drills had prepared them to follow instructions without question, even when they were scared. The third impact cracked the doorframe visibly, and Sarah knew the next one would likely succeed. She moved into position, her body automatically falling into a combat stance that felt as natural as breathing despite the 3 years that had passed since she left active duty. When the door finally gave way on the fourth attempt, it burst open with enough force to slam against the wall behind it. The man who stumbled through was tall and disheveled, with wild eyes and hands that shook with adrenaline or something worse. He was clearly not a student or staff member, his clothes were dirty and torn, and there was something desperate and dangerous in his expression. For a split second, the intruder didn't see Sarah. His eyes were focused on scanning the room for occupants, probably expecting to find cowering children he could use as hostages or worse. What he found instead was a 31-year-old former Navy SEAL who had spent years training for exactly this type of situation. The man's gaze swept across the seemingly empty classroom before finally landing on Sarah, who was standing calmly beside the broken door. His eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been relief. Here was an adult, someone he could control, someone he could use to get whatever he wanted. Perfect, he said, his voice rough and agitated. You're coming with me, lady. These kids are gonna watch what happens when people don't do what I say. He lunged toward Sarah, clearly intending to grab her and use her as leverage. It was the kind of move that might have worked against a typical elementary school teacher, someone trained to nurture and protect but not necessarily to fight. Unfortunately for him, Sarah Martinez was anything but typical. As his hands reached for her arms, Sarah's body moved with a fluidity and precision that seemed almost supernatural. In one smooth motion, she sidestepped his grasp, grabbed his extended wrist, and used his own momentum to spin him around. Before he could even register what was happening, she had twisted his arm behind his back and applied pressure to specific points that her SEAL instructors had taught her years ago. The man's aggressive advance turned into a cry of pain and surprise as he found himself face down on the classroom floor with a woman half his size controlling his movements completely. He tried to struggle, but Sarah applied just enough additional pressure to make it clear that resistance would only make his situation worse. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her voice deadly calm. "You're going to lie still and quiet until the police arrive. If you try to move or speak, I'm going to apply pressure that will make you wish you had stayed home today." The speed and efficiency of her response had been so swift that the entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. One moment, a dangerous intruder was threatening her classroom, and, the next moment, that same man was completely neutralized and under her control. From their hiding place behind the filing cabinet, Sarah's students had heard the commotion but couldn't see what was happening. All they knew was that their teacher had told them to hide, and now there were strange sounds coming from the front of the classroom. "Miss Martinez?" Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Tyler," Sarah replied without taking her attention off her captive. "Everyone stay exactly where you are. The police will be here very soon." As if summoned by her words, the sound of heavy footsteps and shouted commands began echoing through the hallway. The cavalry had finally arrived, but Sarah had already handled the situation herself. She maintained her hold on the intruder while listening to the approaching officers coordinate their search of the building. Within minutes, 2 police officers appeared in her doorway, weapons drawn but quickly lowered when they saw the scene before them. A woman in a floral dress had a much larger man completely subdued and under control, maintaining what was clearly a professional restrained hold. "Ma'am," said the first officer, a veteran with graying temples who had clearly seen his share of unusual situations. "Are you injured? Do you need medical assistance?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied calmly. "This man forced his way into my classroom with what appeared to be hostile intentions. He's been secured and hasn't been seriously injured. My students are hiding behind the desk and are unharmed." The officers exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They had been expecting to find either hostages or casualties, not an elementary school teacher who had single-handedly apprehended a dangerous intruder. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to slowly release the suspect so we can take him into custody," the second officer said, pulling out handcuffs. Sarah nodded and began carefully releasing her hold, ready to re-engage if necessary. The intruder, who had been completely silent during his restraint, seemed to be in shock about what had just happened to him. As the officers took him into custody, he kept looking back at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and what might have been respect. "How did you?" he started to ask, but one of the officers cut him off. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began, launching into the Miranda rights while securing the handcuffs. As the man was led away, Sarah turned her attention back to her students, who were still hiding exactly where she had told them to stay. Her heart rate was already returning to normal, but she knew the children were probably terrified and confused about what had just happened. "Okay, everyone," she said, her voice returning to its usual gentle tone. "The police are here and everything is safe now. You can come out from your hiding spot." 22 third graders emerged from behind the filing cabinet, their eyes wide with questions and amazement. They had heard the commotion but hadn't seen their teacher's remarkable display of combat skills. All they knew was that there had been a scary man, and now there wasn't. "Miss Martinez," Emma said quietly, "what happened to the bad man?" Sarah knelt down to their level, automatically shifting back into teacher mode even as adrenaline still coursed through her system. The man was confused and angry about something that had nothing to do with us. The police officers are going to help him, and we're all perfectly safe. As paramedics and additional officers filled the hallway outside, Sarah began the process of helping her students understand and process what had just happened. She knew that this incident would change everything, not just for her students, but for her own carefully constructed new life as well. In the aftermath of the incident, Lincoln Elementary School transformed into something resembling a military operation. Police officers secured the perimeter, paramedics checked on everyone who had been in the building, and crisis counselors began arriving to help students and staff process what had happened. Sarah found herself at the center of attention in a way she had never wanted or expected. Detective Maria Gonzalez was the first investigator to interview Sarah, and her questions were both professional and puzzled. They sat in the principal's office while the school was gradually cleared of emergency personnel and worried parents began arriving to collect their children. Miss Martinez, Detective Gonzalez began, consulting her notepad, "I need to understand exactly what happened in your classroom. According to the responding officers, they found you restraining the suspect using what appears to be advanced defensive techniques. Can you walk me through your actions?" Sarah had been dreading this moment. For 3 years, she had successfully maintained her cover as simply another elementary school teacher. Now, her past was about to be exposed whether she wanted it to be or not. "The man forced his way into my classroom," Sarah said carefully. "When he tried to grab me, I defended myself and my students using techniques I learned in self-defense classes." Detective Gonzalez looked up from her notes with a skeptical expression. "Ma'am, I've been investigating crimes for 15 years. What you did to that suspect wasn't basic self-defense. The hold you used and the speed of your response suggest professional training. Military or law enforcement?" Sarah met the detective's eyes steadily. She had always known this day might come, but she had hoped it would be years in the future, if ever. Now, sitting in the principal's office with police tape still visible through the windows, she had to decide how much of her truth to reveal. "I served in the Navy before becoming a teacher," she said finally. "What was your specialty?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah could continue to deflect, but she realized that her actions had been too precise and too professional to explain away with vague references to military service. Besides, Detective Gonzalez seemed like someone who would keep digging until she found the complete truth anyway. "I was a Navy SEAL," Sarah said quietly. Detective Gonzalez's pen stopped moving. She looked up sharply, studying Sarah's face as if seeing her for the first time. "A SEAL? You're telling me that we have a former Navy SEAL working as a third-grade teacher, and nobody knew about it?" "I didn't think it was relevant to my job," Sarah replied. "I came to Lincoln Elementary to teach children, not to be defined by my military service." The detective leaned back in her chair, processing this information. "Well, it became relevant today. Do you realize what could have happened if you hadn't been in that classroom? If it had been any other teacher?" Sarah had been trying not to think about that exact scenario. The intruder had been agitated and clearly unstable. Without someone capable of stopping him, he could have hurt or killed children before the police arrived. The thought made her feel sick, but it also confirmed that she had made the right choice in neutralizing the threat quickly. "I did what I had to do to protect my students," Sarah said simply. Before Detective Gonzalez could ask another question, there was a knock on the office door. Principal Williams entered, followed by a man Sarah didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Miss Martinez," Principal Williams said, "this is Superintendent Bradley. He wanted to speak with you personally." Superintendent Bradley extended his hand, and Sarah noticed the firm grip and direct eye contact that suggested he was no stranger to military protocols himself. "Miss Martinez, I want to thank you for your actions today," he said. "You prevented what could have been a terrible tragedy. The entire district is in your debt." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the praise. In her mind, she had simply done what needed to be done. The idea of being celebrated for something that felt like basic duty didn't sit well with her. "I was just doing my job, sir," she replied. "Actually," Detective Gonzalez interjected, what you did was far beyond the job description of an elementary school teacher. Which brings up some important questions about district policies and background checks. The room fell silent. Sarah realized that her revelation was creating complications she hadn't anticipated. School districts had policies about disclosure of military service, especially specialized service that might affect how they assigned personnel. By not revealing her SEAL background during the hiring process, she might have put herself and the district in an awkward position. Superintendent Bradley seemed to be thinking along the same lines. Miss Martinez, I appreciate your desire for privacy about your service record, but I need to understand why this information wasn't included in your employment application. Sarah took a deep breath. This was the conversation she had been hoping to avoid for the rest of her career. Sir, I left military service because I wanted a completely different life. I've seen and done things that I wanted to leave behind. Teaching gives me the opportunity to focus on building rather than destroying, on protecting innocence rather than eliminating threats. I thought that if people knew about my background, they would see me as a weapon first and a teacher second. Her words carried a weight that made everyone in the room pause. There was pain in her voice that spoke to experiences most people couldn't imagine, and a sincerity that was impossible to question. I've never used my training in the classroom before today, she continued. I've never even thought about it. I became a teacher because I wanted to be someone who helped children learn and grow, not someone who fought battles. Superintendent Bradley nodded slowly. I can understand that perspective, Miss Martinez. However, what happened today is going to generate significant attention. We're going to need to discuss how to handle the publicity and what this means for your continued employment. The word publicity made Sarah's heart sink. She had worked so hard to build a quiet, normal life. The thought of reporters and news cameras descending on her peaceful existence was almost as terrifying as the original threat had been. Will I be able to continue teaching? She asked. That remains to be determined, the superintendent replied. There will be an investigation, interviews with parents and students, and we'll need to review our policies. For now, you're on paid administrative leave while we sort everything out. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of her world shifting beneath her feet. 3 years of carefully constructed normalcy was crumbling because she had done what came naturally when her students were threatened. Detective Gonzalez closed her notepad and stood up. Miss Martinez, we'll need a more detailed statement about the incident, but, for now, you're free to go. The suspect is in custody and will be charged with breaking and entering, attempted assault, and endangering children. As the meeting broke up and Sarah prepared to leave the school that had been her sanctuary, Principal Williams walked with her toward the main entrance. The hallways felt different now, less like a safe space for learning and more like a place where violence had intruded. Sarah, Principal Williams said quietly, I want you to know that personally, I'm grateful for what you did. Those children in your classroom are alive and unharmed because of your actions. Whatever the district decides, that fact doesn't change. Outside, the parking lot was filled with news vans and reporters. Word had already gotten out that something unusual had happened at Lincoln Elementary, and Sarah could see cameras being positioned to capture her exit. Her worst fears about publicity were already beginning to materialize. She walked to her car with her head down, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters who had somehow learned her name. As she drove away from the school, Sarah realized that her life would never be the same. The quiet, anonymous existence she had built was over, replaced by something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. At home in her small apartment, Sarah sat on her couch and stared at the challenge coin she had retrieved from her desk drawer at school. For 3 years, it had been a memory from another life. Now, it felt like a reminder of who she really was beneath the teacher's facade. Her phone had been ringing constantly since she arrived home. Reporters, district officials, even some of her former SEAL teammates who had seen the news reports. She hadn't answered any of the calls, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. As evening fell, Sarah finally picked up her phone and scrolled through the voicemail messages. Most were from strangers or media contacts, but one made her pause. It was from Emma's mother, the quiet third grader who loved books. Miss Martinez, the message began, this is Jennifer Patterson, Emma's mom. I just wanted to call and say thank you.
Emma told me what happened today, and I can't imagine how scary it must have been.
She said you kept everyone safe and that she wasn't afraid because she knew you would protect them. I don't care what anyone says about policies or procedures, you're a hero in our family.
Thank you for saving our children.
Similar messages followed from other parents, each one expressing gratitude and support. As Sarah listened to them, she began to realize that maybe her two identities, the warrior and the teacher, weren't as incompatible as she had believed.
Maybe she didn't have to choose between protecting children and educating them.
Maybe, for the first time in her life, she could be both things at once. The challenge ahead would be convincing the school district, the media, and the community that a former Navy SEAL could also be the gentle, nurturing teacher their children needed. It wouldn't be easy, but Sarah was beginning to think it might be possible. 3 weeks after the incident at Lincoln Elementary, Sarah found herself sitting in a television studio, facing a panel of news anchors who seemed both fascinated and puzzled by her story. The interview had been scheduled as part of the district's damage control strategy, but Sarah had insisted on using it as an opportunity to tell her story on her own terms. So, Miss Martinez, the lead anchor began, you went from serving as one of the military's most elite soldiers to teaching third grade.
That's quite a career change. What drove that decision?
Sarah had practiced this answer, but, sitting under the bright studio lights with millions of people potentially watching, the words felt more important than ever. After 6 years of military service, I realized that I wanted to contribute to society in a different way, she said. In the military, I was trained to eliminate threats and protect national security. As a teacher, I get to nurture young minds and help children discover their potential. Both roles involve protection and service, but teaching allows me to build something positive rather than just preventing something negative.
The second anchor leaned forward. But, don't you think parents have a right to know if their child's teacher has extensive combat training? Aren't there concerns about having someone with your background around children?
It was the question Sarah had been dreading, but she had prepared for it carefully. I understand those concerns, she replied. But I would ask parents to look at my 3 years of teaching record.
I've never had a disciplinary incident. I've never raised my voice to a student.
My evaluations consistently rate me as caring, patient, and effective. The skills that made me successful as a SEAL, discipline, attention to detail, the ability to stay calm under pressure, are the same skills that make me effective in the classroom. Behind the cameras, Sarah could see her lawyer and the district's public relations manager watching nervously. This interview would likely determine not just her future at Lincoln Elementary, but her entire teaching career. Tell us about the day of the incident, the third anchor prompted.
What went through your mind when you realized there was a threat in your building?
Sarah took a breath, choosing her words carefully.
My first thought was protecting my students. That's true of any teacher facing a crisis.
The difference is that my training gave me tools that most teachers don't have. When that man broke into my classroom, I didn't have to rely on hoping help would arrive in time. I was able to neutralize the threat immediately. The police reports described your response as professionally executed and textbook. You subdued a man significantly larger than yourself in a matter of seconds. Doesn't that level of capability seem dangerous in a school environment? More dangerous than being helpless when children are threatened?
Sarah countered. That man could have hurt or killed students while we waited for police to arrive.
My background meant that didn't happen. I don't see how that's anything but positive. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, with questions about SEAL training, her decision to keep her background private, and the district's review process. Through it all, Sarah maintained the same calm professionalism that had characterized both her military service and her teaching career.
As the cameras stopped rolling, the lead anchor approached Sarah personally.
Off the record, she said, I have a 7-year-old daughter. If something like this happened at her school, I would want someone like you there to protect her. The sentiment was echoed by many of the responses that flooded social media after the interview aired. While there were certainly critics who questioned whether someone with Sarah's background belonged in an elementary school, the overwhelming response was supportive. Parents appreciated having someone capable of protecting their children, and many teachers reached out to say they wished they had similar training. The school district's decision came 2 days after the interview. Superintendent Bradley called Sarah personally to deliver the news. "Miss Martinez, after reviewing all the evidence and considering community input, the district has decided to offer you a position as our Director of School Safety. You would be responsible for training staff in crisis response, developing security protocols, and serving as a resource for all our schools." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. It wasn't the simple return to her classroom that she had hoped for, but it was something potentially more meaningful. "What about teaching?" she asked. "You would still teach, but in a different capacity. You develop and deliver safety training programs, work with teachers on emergency preparedness, and, yes, you could still work directly with students on security awareness programs. Think of it as teaching on a district-wide scale." The position would mean leaving her comfortable anonymity behind permanently, but it also offered the chance to use all of her skills, both military and educational, to make a real difference in children's safety. "I'll take the position," Sarah said. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a room full of teachers from across the district, leading a training session on crisis response. The teachers initially seemed nervous about learning from someone with her background, but as the session progressed, they began to see the practical value of her expertise. "The most important thing to remember," Sarah told the group, "is that your instincts as educators are your greatest asset. You know your students, you know your environment, and you know how to keep children calm. My job is just to give you additional tools to work with." She demonstrated simple techniques for classroom security, explained how to recognize potential threats, and walked them through communication protocols. Most importantly, she helped them understand that being prepared for danger didn't mean living in fear. After the training, a young teacher approached her. "Miss Martinez, I was terrified when I heard you were going to be doing these sessions. I thought you were going to turn us into soldiers. But what you're teaching us is really just about being better teachers, isn't it?" Sarah smiled. "That's exactly right. Everything I learned in the military was about protecting people and accomplishing the mission. Teaching is just a different kind of mission with a different kind of protection." The teacher nodded thoughtfully. "My students are lucky to have someone like you watching out for them, even if they don't know it." That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment and looked again at the challenge coin that had started as a reminder of her old life. Now, it felt like a bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming. She was no longer just a former SEAL pretending to be a teacher, or a teacher hiding from her military past. She was something new, someone who could use all of her experiences to serve others. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Emma's mother. "Emma's reading level has improved 2 grade levels since last year. Her new teacher says she's never seen a child so confident and fearless in the classroom. Thank you for everything you taught her about being strong and brave." Sarah realized that this was what success looked like in her new role. It wasn't about the threats she could neutralize or the techniques she could teach other adults. It was about children like Emma who felt safe enough to take risks in their learning because they knew that somewhere, someone was prepared to protect them if necessary. The incident that had threatened to destroy her carefully constructed life had instead opened up possibilities she never could have imagined. Sarah Martinez was still a teacher, still dedicated to nurturing young minds and helping children grow. But now she was also openly a protector, someone who could stand between danger and innocence without having to hide who she really was. As she prepared for bed, Sarah thought about her students from Lincoln Elementary. They had seen her as simply Miss Martinez, their kind and patient teacher. Now they would grow up knowing that sometimes the people who care for you are also prepared to fight for you, and that strength and gentleness could exist in the same person. The man who had broken into her classroom expecting to find a helpless victim had instead encountered someone who refused to let harm come to the children in her care. In trying to use her as a tool for his own purposes, he had inadvertently revealed her true nature, not just as a warrior or a teacher, but as someone who would always choose to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Sarah's story became a symbol for many people of the unexpected heroes who walk among us, the quiet guardians who dedicate their lives to service in ways both seen and unseen. She proved that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who chooses to use that power to nurture rather than to dominate. The little girl who loved books was reading at an advanced level. The energetic boy who couldn't sit still had learned to channel his enthusiasm into helping others. The troubled child from a broken home had found stability in knowing that some adults could be trusted to keep their promises of protection. And their teacher, their protector, continued to serve, no longer hiding behind a false identity but embracing the full complexity of who she was and who she could become. Sarah Martinez had finally found a way to be both the warrior and the nurturer, the guardian and the guide, the protector and the teacher. In the end, that was her greatest victory, not the efficient neutralization of a single threat, but the realization that she didn't have to choose between the different aspects of herself. She could be all of them at once, and, in doing so, she could serve others more completely than she ever had before.